The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Sandringham House as 5-year-old Prince Louis pressed his nose against the glass, watching the gardeners tend to the rose gardens below. His breath created small circles of fog on the pristine window as he bounced slightly on his toes, barely containing his excitement. Today was special. It was the annual Sandringham Easter celebration, and the entire royal family had gathered for the weekend festivities. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, walked into the drawing-room carrying a steaming cup of tea, her morning routine always beginning early despite the chaos that inevitably followed when all 3 children were together under one roof. She found Louis exactly where she expected, drawn to any window that offered a view of the outdoors and potential adventure. "Good morning, my darling," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What has captured your attention so completely this morning?" Louis turned around, his bright blue eyes sparkling with mischief and wonder. "Mummy, look! The gardens are so big here. At home, I can see the end of our garden, but, here." He gestured dramatically toward the window, "It goes on forever and ever." Catherine smiled, remembering her own first impression of Sandringham's sprawling grounds when she had joined the family years ago. The estate, spanning 20,000 acres, had been the private retreat of 4 generations of monarchs, and its grandeur never failed to impress visitors, young and old alike. "That's right, Louis. Your great-grandmother loved this place very much. She spent many happy times here, especially during the holidays." Catherine's voice carried a gentle reverence when speaking of the late Queen Elizabeth II, whose presence still seemed to linger in every room of the beloved estate. The sound of footsteps thundering down the corridor announced the arrival of Louis's siblings before they burst through the drawing-room doors. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old and, carrying herself with increasing grace and confidence, entered first, followed closely by Prince George, who at 10 was beginning to show hints of the young man he would become. "Louis! There you are," Charlotte exclaimed, slightly out of breath from running. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Papa wants us all together for breakfast, and, then." She paused dramatically, knowing exactly how to build suspense for her younger brother. "Cook has something very special planned for today." George nodded enthusiastically, his usually reserved demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. "She's been working on it all morning. We saw her through the kitchen window, and there were chocolate smells everywhere." Louis's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Chocolate was, without question, his greatest weakness and source of joy. Whether it was a simple biscuit with his afternoon tea or the elaborate Easter eggs that appeared each spring, chocolate held an almost magical power over the young prince. His face lit up with pure delight as he began bouncing on his toes again, this time with renewed energy. "Chocolate? Really? What kind of chocolate? Is it eggs? Is it cake? Can we have some now?" The questions tumbled out of Louis's mouth faster than anyone could answer, his excitement building with each word. Catherine laughed, recognizing the telltale signs of what she and William privately called Louis's chocolate mode, a state of heightened animation that usually preceded either wonderful joy or spectacular mischief, sometimes both simultaneously. "Patience, my love," she said, though her own curiosity was piqued. The Sandringham kitchen staff were renowned for their culinary expertise, and any special chocolate creation was certain to be extraordinary. "Let's go find Papa and see what Cook has prepared for us." The family made their way through the elegant corridors of Sandringham House, Louis skipping alongside his siblings while Catherine walked behind, secretly amused by her youngest son's barely contained enthusiasm. The house felt different during family gatherings, less formal, more alive with the sounds of children's laughter and conversation. They found Prince William in the morning room, already dressed for the day and reading through a stack of papers while sipping his coffee. Despite being on holiday, royal duties had a way of following the family wherever they went, though William made it a priority to keep such interruptions to a minimum during precious family time. "Good morning, troublemakers," William said with a grin, setting aside his papers as the children surrounded his chair. Louis immediately climbed onto his father's lap, while George and Charlotte settled into nearby chairs, everyone's attention focused on the mysterious chocolate surprise awaiting them. Papa, George and Charlotte say Cook has made something special with chocolate. Louis announced, as if this were breaking news of international importance. William chuckled, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. Is that so? Well, we'd better not keep Cook waiting then. She's been working very hard to make this weekend special for all of us. As they made their way toward the dining room, Louis's imagination began working overtime. He envisioned elaborate chocolate sculptures, towering cakes, perhaps even a chocolate fountain like he'd once seen in a movie. His small hands gestured animatedly as he shared his theories with anyone within earshot, his excitement infectious and endearing. The dining room at Sandringham always felt grand yet welcoming during family gatherings. The long mahogany table had been set for breakfast with the finest china, crystal glasses catching and reflecting the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Fresh flowers from the estate's gardens created colorful centerpieces, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air. But it was what occupied the center of a side table that captured everyone's attention immediately. Cook had outdone herself, creating what could only be described as a chocolate masterpiece. The centerpiece was an elaborate Easter egg sculpture, easily 3 feet tall, crafted entirely from the finest Belgian chocolate. Intricate details had been carved and molded into its surface, delicate flowers, royal emblems, and tiny figures that seemed to dance around the egg's circumference. Surrounding the magnificent centerpiece were smaller chocolate creations, individual Easter eggs personalized for each family member, chocolate sculptures of the estate's beloved corgis, and an assortment of truffles and bonbons arranged on silver platters like precious jewels. Louis stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth falling open in amazement. For several seconds, he simply stared, unable to process the chocolate wonderland before him. Then, as if emerging from a trance, he let out a squeal of pure joy that echoed throughout the room. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he declared, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Can we eat it? Can we eat it now? Please, please, please." Cook, a matronly woman who had been with the royal household for over 20 years, emerged from the kitchen wearing her best apron and a proud smile. She had anticipated this reaction, particularly from Prince Louis, whose love of chocolate was well known among the staff. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said with a curtsy, "I wanted to create something special for the Easter weekend. This chocolate sculpture will be the centerpiece for tomorrow's Easter celebration, but..." She paused, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I may have prepared a small sampling for breakfast." She gestured toward a separate platter containing smaller chocolate treats, miniature versions of the larger masterpiece, perfectly sized for eager young hands and curious palates. Louis looked back and forth between the magnificent centerpiece and the sampling platter, his internal struggle clearly visible on his expressive face. The logical part of his mind understood that the large chocolate sculpture was for tomorrow's celebration, but the 5-year-old part of his brain could only focus on the fact that there was more chocolate in front of him than he had ever seen in one place. "Thank you, Cook," Catherine said warmly, recognizing both the artistry and the tremendous effort that had gone into creating such an elaborate display. "This is absolutely stunning. The children will remember this forever." William nodded in agreement, though he couldn't help but notice the way Louis was eyeing the centerpiece with the intensity of a general planning a military campaign. Having been a mischievous child himself, William recognized the look and made a mental note to keep a close eye on his youngest son throughout the day. As the family settled around the breakfast table, Louis found it nearly impossible to focus on his eggs and toast. His gaze kept drifting to the chocolate display, his mind calculating distances and possibilities. The smaller chocolate treats from Cook's sampling platter were delicious, but they only served to intensify his desire for the magnificent centerpiece. George, ever observant, noticed his brother's distraction. "Louis, your eggs are getting cold," he pointed out, though not unkindly. At 10, George was beginning to understand the weight of royal expectations and proper behavior, but he remembered what it felt like to be completely overwhelmed by excitement. Charlotte, possessing wisdom beyond her 8 years, attempted to redirect Louis's attention. Did you know that chocolate comes from special trees that grow in faraway countries? Cook told me yesterday that the chocolate for our Easter display came all the way from Belgium, where they make the most delicious chocolate in the whole world. This information only served to make the chocolate seem more precious and desirable to Louis. Belgium sounded exotic and mysterious, and, knowing that the chocolate had traveled such a great distance to reach Sandringham made it seem even more special. Belgium, Louis repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the word. Do you think the people in Belgium eat chocolate for breakfast every day? I don't think so, darling, Catherine replied with a laugh. Even in Belgium, chocolate is still a special treat. As breakfast continued, the conversation flowed naturally between family plans for the day, memories of past Easter celebrations, and gentle teasing between the siblings. William shared stories from his own childhood Easter celebrations at Sandringham, painting pictures of egg hunts in the gardens and elaborate family dinners that lasted well into the evening. But, throughout the meal, Louis remained somewhat distracted, his attention divided between participating in family conversation and stealing glances at the chocolate masterpiece. With each look, his fascination grew stronger, and his 5-year-old mind began formulating what seemed like a perfectly reasonable plan. After all, he reasoned silently, it was chocolate. It was meant to be eaten eventually. And he was being very good, sitting properly at breakfast and using his napkin exactly as his parents had taught him. Surely, just one small piece wouldn't hurt anyone. The morning sun continued to stream through the dining room windows, illuminating the chocolate sculpture and making it appear even more magnificent and tempting. Cook moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room, ensuring that every detail of breakfast was perfect, occasionally pausing to admire her chocolate creation with obvious pride. Louis finished his breakfast with unusual speed, barely tasting his food as his excitement continued to build. When Catherine suggested that the children might enjoy a walk through the gardens before the afternoon's planned activities, Louis's face brightened considerably. Fresh air and exercise sounded wonderful, but, more importantly, it would give him time to think and plan. As the family prepared to leave the dining room, Louis lingered for just a moment, taking one final, longing look at the chocolate centerpiece. It seemed to call to him, its rich brown surface gleaming in the morning light, promising sweetness and satisfaction beyond anything he could imagine. "Coming, Louis?" William called from the doorway, extending his hand toward his youngest son. "Yes, Papa," Louis replied, reluctantly turning away from the chocolate display and taking his father's hand. But, as they walked toward the gardens, his mind was already working, calculating possibilities and timing, his mischievous nature beginning to assert itself in ways that would soon test his parents' patience and provide the family with a story they would remember for years to come. The chocolate adventure was about to begin, and Prince Louis was determined to be its hero, regardless of the consequences that might follow. The Sandringham garden stretched endlessly before them as the Wales family stepped onto the stone terrace that connected the house to its magnificent grounds. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the sweet scent of early spring flowers and the earthy smell of freshly turned soil where gardeners had been preparing beds for the season ahead. Louis skipped ahead of his family, his energy seemingly boundless despite having just finished breakfast. However, his usual enthusiasm for outdoor exploration was somewhat distracted today. Every few steps, he would glance back toward the house, specifically toward the dining room windows where he knew the chocolate masterpiece waited in all its magnificent glory. "Look at the daffodils, Louis," Charlotte called out, pointing toward a hillside covered in bright yellow blooms. "They're everywhere. It's like someone sprinkled sunshine all over the grass." Normally, such a sight would have sent Louis racing toward the flowers, eager to explore and probably attempt to pick a bouquet for his mother. Today, however, he simply nodded and offered a distracted, "Very pretty, Charlotte," before his gaze drifted back toward the house. Catherine walked alongside William, both parents enjoying the peaceful morning while keeping watchful eyes on their children. Years of parenting had taught them to recognize when one of their children was preoccupied, and Louis's behavior was sending clear signals that his mind was elsewhere. "He's been unusually quiet since breakfast," William observed quietly, watching as Louis half-heartedly examined a flower bed while repeatedly looking over his shoulder toward the house. "That chocolate display has completely captured his imagination," Catherine replied with a knowing smile. "I recognize that look. It's the same expression he wore last Christmas when he spotted the present pile under the tree 3 days early." They continued their walk through the garden's winding paths, past the kitchen garden where vegetables grew in neat, orderly rows, and alongside the ornamental lake where swans glided gracefully across the dark water. George and Charlotte raced ahead, engaging in an elaborate game that seemed to involve collecting interesting stones and competing to skip them across the lake's surface. Louis followed along, but his participation lacked his usual enthusiasm. His responses to his siblings' invitations to join their games were polite but distracted. When Charlotte challenged him to find the most interesting leaf, he picked up the first one he saw without really examining it. When George suggested they look for frogs near the water's edge, Louis agreed but spent more time staring back at the house than searching among the reeds. "Louis, darling, are you feeling all right?" Catherine asked, crouching down to his level as they paused beside a particularly beautiful rose garden. "You seem a bit far away this morning." Louis looked up at his mother, his blue eyes wide and innocent, though Catherine could detect a hint of something else lurking beneath the surface, determination, perhaps, or the beginning of a plan forming in his young mind. "I'm fine, Mummy," he said, offering her his most angelic smile. "Just thinking about things." "What sorts of things?" William asked, joining them as George and Charlotte continued their exploration nearby. "Important things," Louis replied with the seriousness that only a 5-year-old could bring to such a statement. "Like, how chocolate is made, and why we have to wait until tomorrow for the Easter celebration, and whether chocolate tastes different when it's shaped like beautiful art." Catherine and William exchanged glances, both recognizing the direction of their son's thoughts. They had seen this type of intense focus before, usually right before Louis embarked on one of his well-intentioned but often misguided adventures. "The chocolate sculpture is very special, isn't it?" Catherine said carefully. "Cook worked very hard to create something beautiful for our Easter celebration tomorrow." "Yes," Louis agreed enthusiastically. "It's the most beautiful chocolate I've ever seen. Much more beautiful than the chocolate we eat at home." "Do you think it tastes more beautiful too?" William couldn't help but smile at his son's logic, even as he recognized the potential danger in such thinking. "I imagine it tastes wonderful, but it's meant to be enjoyed by everyone together tomorrow. That's what makes it special, sharing it with the whole family during our Easter celebration." Louis nodded solemnly, as if taking this information very seriously. "Sharing is important," he agreed. "But, what if someone just wanted to make sure it tasted good before tomorrow? Just to check that Cook made it properly? That would be helping, wouldn't it?" Catherine bit her lip to suppress a laugh, recognizing her youngest son's remarkable ability to rationalize almost any course of action he was considering. "I'm quite confident that Cook knows exactly what she's doing, darling. She's been making chocolate creations for many years." "But, what if," Louis began, then seemed to think better of continuing that line of questioning. Instead, he brightened suddenly, and pointed toward a cluster of trees in the distance. "What's over there, Papa? Can we explore?" The sudden change of subject didn't fool either parent, but they allowed Louis to lead them toward the wooded area he had indicated. The family spent the next hour wandering through the grounds, with George and Charlotte engaging in increasingly elaborate games while Louis maintained his polite but distracted demeanor. They visited the church where the royal family traditionally attended Easter services, walked through the stable area where horses grazed peacefully in paddocks, and explored the woodland paths that wound through ancient oak and elm trees. Throughout their journey, Louis remained pleasant and cooperative, but Catherine noticed that he frequently oriented himself so that he could see the house, as if keeping track of their distance from the dining room and its tempting chocolate treasure. As they made their way back toward the house for lunch, Louis's behavior became increasingly fidgety. He walked faster, urged the family to take shorter breaks, and seemed eager to return to the indoor spaces of Sandringham. When Charlotte suggested they stop to pick flowers for a bouquet, Louis politely declined to help, claiming he wanted to get inside to wash his hands. Since when does Louis voluntarily choose hygiene over flower picking? George whispered to Charlotte, both siblings beginning to sense that their brother was up to something. During lunch, Louis ate with remarkable speed, finishing his sandwich and fruit before anyone else had made significant progress on their meals. He sat politely in his chair afterward, swinging his legs and occasionally glancing toward the dining room where the chocolate display remained in all its magnificent glory. "May I be excused, please?" Louis asked with exceptional politeness once everyone had finished eating. "I'd like to wash my hands properly and maybe read a book quietly." Catherine raised an eyebrow at this request. While Louis was generally well behaved, volunteering for additional hand washing and quiet reading time was distinctly out of character, particularly when there were gardens to explore and siblings to play with. "That sounds lovely, darling," Catherine replied carefully. "Which book were you thinking of reading?" Louis paused for just a moment, clearly not having anticipated this follow-up question. The one about adventures. With pictures. I'll find a good one in the library. Would you like me to help you choose something?" William offered, beginning to rise from his chair. "No, thank you, Papa," Louis said quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. "I can find something myself. I'm very good at picking books now." George and Charlotte watched this exchange with growing interest, their sibling instincts alerting them to the fact that Louis was definitely planning something. They had lived with their younger brother long enough to recognize the telltale signs of mischief brewing. "Actually," George said slowly, "I might like to read a book too." "Maybe we could read together, Louis." The suggestion clearly flustered Louis, who had been counting on some unsupervised time to execute whatever plan was forming in his mind. That's very nice, George, but I want to read alone today. Quietly. By myself. Just me and a book." Charlotte joined her older brother in his suspicions. "I love books too. We could all read together. It would be fun, like a family reading time." Louis's face flushed slightly, and his voice rose a bit higher than usual. "No. I mean, no thank you. I really want to read alone. It's important that I read alone. For learning purposes." Catherine and William were now fully aware that their youngest son was planning something, though they weren't entirely certain what. Years of parenting had taught them that sometimes the best approach was to give children enough rope to either pull themselves up or hang themselves with, depending on the wisdom of their intended actions. "All right, Louis," Catherine said finally. "You may be excused to read quietly. We'll be in the sitting room if you need anything." Louis practically leaped from his chair, offering enthusiastic thanks before heading toward the door. He paused at the threshold and turned back to his family with another angelic smile. "I'll be very good and very quiet," he promised solemnly. "You won't even know I'm there." After Louis left, the family sat in contemplative silence for several moments. George and Charlotte continued to eye the doorway where their brother had disappeared, while Catherine and William processed the conversation they had just witnessed. "He's definitely up to something," George said finally, voicing what everyone was thinking. "The chocolate," Charlotte added with certainty. "He's been thinking about that chocolate sculpture all day. I could see it in his eyes." William sighed, recognizing the truth in his daughter's observation. "Should we follow him? Or let him work through whatever he's planning?" "Let's give him a few minutes," Catherine decided. "Sometimes Louis surprises us with his good judgment. And if he doesn't?" She shrugged with the practiced calm of a mother who had dealt with numerous childhood adventures. "At least we'll have an interesting story to tell." Meanwhile, Louis made his way through the corridors of Sandringham House with the focused determination of a general executing a military strategy. He had spent the entire morning and early afternoon thinking through his plan, considering various approaches and potential obstacles. His first stop was indeed the library, where he selected a book at random, something about horses, which would serve as his alibi if anyone asked what he had been reading. He then made his way cautiously toward the dining room, pausing at each corner to listen for footsteps or voices that might indicate the presence of adults or staff members. The dining room was empty when he arrived, just as he had hoped. The chocolate sculpture sat in magnificent splendor on its designated table, seeming even more impressive and tempting now that he was alone with it. The afternoon light streaming through the windows cast beautiful shadows across its intricately carved surface, making the chocolate appear almost magical. Louis approached slowly, his heart beating faster with each step. He had convinced himself that his intentions were purely noble. He simply wanted to ensure that Cook's masterpiece was perfect for tomorrow's celebration. A small taste, just to confirm the quality, would be helping everyone by guaranteeing that the chocolate was worthy of such an important occasion. Standing before the sculpture, Louis realized he faced a practical challenge he hadn't fully considered during his planning phase. The chocolate egg was significantly taller than he was, and its most accessible parts were at the very bottom. He would need to find a way to reach the areas he wanted to sample without damaging the overall structure. Looking around the room, Louis spotted a small step stool that staff sometimes used to reach higher shelves. Moving with the stealth of a secret agent, he carefully positioned the stool next to the chocolate display, testing its stability before climbing up. From his elevated position, Louis could see the entire sculpture in magnificent detail. Cook had truly outdone herself, creating delicate chocolate flowers, tiny royal emblems, and intricate patterns that seemed almost too beautiful to be food. The rich aroma of high-quality chocolate filled his nostrils, making his mouth water and strengthening his resolve. He reached out slowly, intending to break off just the tiniest piece from an inconspicuous area near the base of the sculpture. His small fingers made contact with the smooth chocolate surface, and he discovered that it was slightly warm from the afternoon sun, making it softer than he had expected. What happened next would later be debated among family members, with each person offering their own theory about the exact sequence of events. What was certain was that Louis's careful touch somehow triggered a chain reaction that neither he nor anyone else could have anticipated. Perhaps it was the warmth of the room, or maybe the sculpture had been more delicately balanced than anyone realized. Possibly Louis applied more pressure than he intended, or the vibrations from the step stool created just enough movement to upset the masterpiece's equilibrium. Whatever the cause, Louis watched in growing horror as a small crack appeared near where he had touched the sculpture. The crack spread slowly at first, then, with increasing speed, running up the side of the chocolate egg like a fault line in an earthquake. "No, no, no," Louis whispered urgently, reaching out as if he could somehow stop the spreading crack with his bare hands. "Please don't break. Please stay together." But the chocolate sculpture had passed its tipping point. With a sound like gentle thunder, the magnificent centerpiece began to collapse, piece by piece, section by section, until what had been Cook's masterpiece became a pile of broken chocolate scattered across the table and floor. Louis stood frozen on his step stool, staring at the destruction before him, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. His innocent attempt to sample a tiny piece had resulted in the complete destruction of the most beautiful chocolate creation he had ever seen. The silence in the dining room was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own rapid breathing and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Louis knew that what had happened was bad, very bad, but the full implications of the situation were still sinking in. Cook had worked for hours, possibly days, to create something special for the family's Easter celebration. Tomorrow's centerpiece, the magnificent sculpture that was meant to bring joy to everyone, was now nothing more than broken pieces of chocolate scattered across fine furniture and Persian carpeting. And it was entirely his fault. As the reality of the situation fully dawned on him, Louis felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. This wasn't the adventure he had planned. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had only wanted to help, to make sure everything was perfect for tomorrow. The sound of footsteps approaching from the corridor sent a jolt of panic through his small body. Someone was coming, and they were going to discover what he had done. The chocolate evidence was everywhere, impossible to hide or explain away. Prince Louis, 5 years old and, faced with the consequences of his well-intentioned but disastrous chocolate adventure, stood among the ruins of Cook's masterpiece and prepared to face the music. His great chocolate caper had gone spectacularly wrong, and there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The footsteps were getting closer, and his moment of reckoning was about to begin. The footsteps paused just outside the dining room door, and Louis held his breath, frozen on his step stool like a statue surrounded by the chocolate carnage he had accidentally created. His heart hammered so loudly in his chest that he was certain whoever was approaching would hear it through the walls. "Your Royal Highness," came a gentle voice that Louis immediately recognized as belonging to Mrs. Henderson, one of the senior housekeeping staff who had worked at Sandringham for nearly 30 years. "Is everything quite all right in there? I thought I heard something fall." Louis's mind raced through possible responses. He could pretend he wasn't there, but his small shoes were clearly visible beneath the tablecloth, and, besides, lying had never been something he was particularly good at. He could try to explain what happened, but the words seemed to stick in his throat like peanut butter. Most pressingly, he realized he was still standing on the step stool in the middle of what could only be described as a chocolate crime scene. Louis managed to squeak out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. I'm here." The door opened slowly, and Mrs. Henderson stepped into the dining room with the careful movements of someone who had learned to expect the unexpected when dealing with royal children over the years. Her experienced eyes immediately took in the scene, the step stool, the scattered chocolate pieces, and one very guilty-looking young prince standing in the middle of it all. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Mrs. Henderson's expression cycled through surprise, assessment, and, what Louis feared might be anger, though her face was too kind to ever look truly frightening. Louis remained motionless, unsure whether movement would make the situation better or significantly worse. "Oh my," Mrs. Henderson said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "It appears we've had a bit of an accident." The kindness in her tone, the fact that she said, "we," instead of, "you," and the gentle way she described the chocolate disaster as merely a bit of an accident, caused the dam of Louis's emotions to finally burst. Tears began streaming down his face as all the guilt, shame, and regret he had been holding inside poured out at once. "I'm sorry," he wailed, his words tumbling out between sobs. "I didn't mean to break it. I just wanted to taste a tiny bit because it looked so beautiful and I wanted to make sure it was perfect for tomorrow and I was very careful but, then, it started to crack and I couldn't stop it and now Cook's beautiful sculpture is ruined and tomorrow's Easter celebration won't be special anymore and it's all my fault." Mrs. Henderson moved quickly to steady the step stool as Louis swayed with the force of his emotional outburst. Her maternal instincts, honed by decades of caring for royal children and grandchildren, immediately shifted into comfort mode. There, Your Royal Highness," she said gently, helping Louis down from the step stool and guiding him to a nearby chair that was safely away from the chocolate debris. "Take some deep breaths for me. In and out, that's right. Everything is going to be just fine." "But, the sculpture," Louis hiccuped through his tears. "It's completely broken. Cook worked so hard, and I destroyed it because I was selfish and couldn't wait until tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson handed Louis a clean handkerchief from her apron pocket, a gesture that somehow made him feel slightly better despite the chocolate catastrophe surrounding them. She had a way of making even the most dire situations feel manageable, a skill that came from years of dealing with various royal mishaps and adventures. "Would you like to tell me exactly what happened?" she asked, settling into a chair beside Louis with the patience of someone who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the aftermath of accidents. Louis wiped his eyes with the handkerchief and took several shaky breaths before beginning his story. He told Mrs. Henderson about his fascination with the chocolate sculpture from the moment he first saw it, about spending the entire morning thinking about it during their garden walk, and about his plan to just taste a tiny piece to make sure it was perfect for the family celebration. I climbed on the stool very carefully, he explained, his voice still thick with tears. And I only touched it with one finger, just the tiniest touch at the bottom where nobody would notice. But, then, it started to crack, and the crack got bigger, and before I knew it, the whole thing was falling apart. Mrs. Henderson listened without judgment, occasionally nodding to show she was following his story. When Louis finished explaining, she sat quietly for a moment, clearly thinking through the situation. "You know, Your Royal Highness," she said finally, "accidents happen to everyone, even when we're trying our very best to be careful. The important thing is how we handle them afterward." "But, I wasn't supposed to touch it at all," Louis said miserably. "Mummy and Papa told us it was for tomorrow's celebration, and I knew that, but I did it anyway because I wanted the chocolate so much." "That's very honest of you to admit," Mrs. Henderson replied. "It takes courage to tell the truth when we've made a mistake. Now, what do you think we should do about this situation?" Louis looked around at the scattered chocolate pieces, some of which were quite large and might still be salvageable. "I should tell Mummy and Papa what happened. And I should apologize to Cook. And maybe we could try to put some pieces back together." "Those are all very good ideas," Mrs. Henderson agreed. "Would you like me to help you gather the larger pieces while we wait for your parents? Some of the chocolate might still be perfectly good, just not in its original shape." Together, they began carefully collecting the broken pieces of the chocolate sculpture. Louis was amazed to discover that while the overall structure had collapsed, many individual components were still intact. The chocolate flowers Cook had crafted were largely unbroken, the royal emblems could be salvaged, and several large sections of the main egg remained in recognizable pieces. As they worked, Mrs. Henderson shared stories of other mishaps she had witnessed over her years at Sandringham. There was the time Prince William had attempted to slide down the main staircase banister and ended up tangled in a tapestry, the incident when Prince Harry had gotten his head stuck between the railings while trying to get a better view of the garden, and various other adventures that had seemed catastrophic at the time but became cherished family memories years later. Every generation of royal children has added their own adventures to Sandringham's history, she told Louis as they carefully placed chocolate pieces on a clean platter. "Your father and uncle were particularly creative when it came to finding trouble, though they usually did it together." This information both comforted and surprised Louis. It was difficult to imagine his father, who always seemed so composed and proper, getting into the kinds of mischief that resulted in household staff telling stories decades later. "Did Papa ever break anything important?" Louis asked, hoping for reassurance that his chocolate catastrophe wasn't unprecedented. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile, "there was the unfortunate incident with the Ming vase and a football, but perhaps that's a story for another day. The point is, Your Royal Highness, that accidents happen, people forgive, and life goes on. The memories we make from these moments often end up being more precious than whatever was broken." Their quiet cleanup was interrupted by the sound of familiar voices approaching from the corridor. Louis recognized his mother's gentle laugh, followed by his father's deeper tones and the chatter of his siblings. His family was coming, drawn perhaps by Mrs. Henderson's absence or simply by the natural flow of their afternoon activities. "They're coming," Louis said unnecessarily, his anxiety beginning to spike again despite Mrs. Henderson's comforting presence. "Yes, they are," she confirmed calmly. "And they're going to want to understand what happened. Do you remember what we discussed about being honest?" Louis nodded, clutching the handkerchief she had given him. "Tell the truth, even when it's scary." "Exactly right. Your parents love you very much, and they'll appreciate your honesty more than anything else." The dining room door opened, and Catherine entered first, followed closely by William and the other children. The conversation died instantly as they took in the scene, Lewis sitting beside Mrs. Henderson with obvious signs of recent tears, chocolate pieces arranged on platters instead of assembled into a magnificent sculpture, and the unmistakable evidence of a significant mishap. "Oh my goodness," Catherine said softly, her maternal instincts immediately assessing whether anyone was hurt before turning to understand what had happened. "Lewis, sweetheart, are you all right?" "I broke the chocolate sculpture," Lewis said immediately, his voice small but clear. He had decided that direct honesty was the only acceptable approach, regardless of the consequences. "I climbed on the step stool because I wanted to taste just a tiny piece, and, when I touched it, the whole thing fell apart. Mrs. Henderson helped me clean up, but it's still ruined, and I'm very sorry." William and Catherine exchanged glances, their parental communication system working instantly to assess the situation. No one was injured, the accident appeared to be genuinely accidental despite poor decision-making, and Lewis was clearly devastated by what had happened. George and Charlotte moved closer to examine the collected chocolate pieces, their expressions showing both sympathy for their brother and fascination with the scale of the destruction he had managed to cause. "It's not completely ruined," Charlotte observed with her characteristic optimism. "Look, you can still see the flowers Cook made, and some of the big pieces are still pretty." "Yeah," George added, though his tone was more practical than encouraging. "It's just different now. Like a chocolate puzzle that came apart." Catherine knelt down beside Lewis's chair, bringing herself to his eye level with the practiced grace of a mother who had navigated numerous childhood crises. "Thank you for telling us the truth right away, darling," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know that wasn't easy to do when you were feeling upset and worried. Are you very angry with me?" Lewis asked in a small voice, not quite daring to look directly at his mother's face. "I'm disappointed that you chose to touch something you knew was meant for tomorrow's celebration," Catherine replied honestly. "But, I'm very proud of you for taking responsibility and telling the truth about what happened." William joined his wife beside Lewis's chair, his expression serious but not unkind. "Son, can you help me understand what you were thinking when you decided to climb up and touch the sculpture?" Lewis took a deep breath, remembering Mrs. Henderson's encouragement about honesty. "I kept thinking about how beautiful it was, and how it must taste even more special because it came from Belgium and Cook worked so hard on it. I thought if I just tasted a tiny bit from the bottom where no one would see, I could make sure it was perfect for everyone tomorrow. I thought I was helping." "I can understand that reasoning," William said carefully. "But, what should you have done instead if you were worried about whether the chocolate was good enough?" "I should have asked you or Mummy," Lewis admitted. "Or maybe talked to Cook about it. I shouldn't have tried to fix it by myself." "That's exactly right," William confirmed. "When we have concerns or questions, it's always better to talk to the adults who can help us rather than trying to handle everything ourselves." Mrs. Henderson, who had been standing quietly nearby during the family conversation, stepped forward with her characteristic diplomacy. "If I may, Your Royal Highnesses," she said, "I believe Cook is in the kitchen, and she might appreciate hearing about this situation directly from Prince Louis. She's quite understanding about these matters, and I think she might have some ideas about how to make tomorrow special despite this accident." The suggestion sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Lewis. Facing Cook, seeing her reaction to the destruction of her beautiful creation, felt like the most difficult part of his ordeal yet to come. "Do I have to tell her right now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It would be the right thing to do," Catherine said gently. "And I think you'll feel much better once you've apologized properly. Sometimes the anticipation of difficult conversations is worse than the actual conversation." George, displaying the protective instincts of an older brother, moved closer to Lewis. "We could come with you, if you want. All of us together." "That's very thoughtful, George," William said, "but I think Lewis needs to handle this responsibility himself. We'll be nearby for support, but apologizing is something he needs to do personally." Charlotte, never to be left out of family problem solving, had been studying the broken chocolate pieces with the intensity of an art restorer examining a damaged masterpiece. Maybe Cook could use these pieces to make something new, she suggested. Like instead of one big sculpture, she could make lots of smaller sculptures, or maybe a chocolate garden with all the flowers and pieces arranged differently. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up at Charlotte's suggestion. Your Royal Highness has a wonderful creative mind. Cook is very skilled at adapting her plans when circumstances change. Louis looked at the collected chocolate pieces with new eyes, beginning to see possibilities rather than just destruction. Perhaps his accident hadn't completely ruined Easter after all. Perhaps there was still a way to make tomorrow special, even if it looked different from the original plan. Could we really make something new? He asked hopefully. Something that might still be beautiful and special for Easter. There's only one way to find out, William said, standing and extending his hand to Louis. Are you ready to go talk to Cook and see what she thinks about Charlotte's idea? Louis took his father's hand, his legs feeling slightly shaky as he stood up. The walk to the kitchen felt like the longest journey of his young life, but he knew it was a journey he needed to make. Mrs. Henderson had taught him that accidents could become opportunities, and Charlotte had shown him that broken things could be transformed into something new and beautiful. As the family prepared to leave the dining room, Louis took one last look at the platter of chocolate pieces. They no longer looked like failure and destruction to him. Instead, they looked like the beginning of a new adventure, one that would require courage, creativity, and the support of people who loved him enough to help him turn his mistake into something meaningful. The chocolate trouble at Sandringham was far from over, but Louis was beginning to understand that the ending of his story was still being written, and it might turn out very differently from the disaster he had feared. The walk from the dining room to the kitchen felt like a march toward Judgment Day for Louis, even though his father's steady hand in his own provided comfort and reassurance. Each step echoed softly against the polished floors of Sandringham's corridors, and Louis found himself counting his footsteps as a way to manage his anxiety about the conversation ahead. The kitchen at Sandringham was unlike any kitchen Louis had ever seen in other homes. It was a vast, professional space with gleaming copper pots hanging from hooks, marble surfaces that stretched for yards, and multiple ovens that could handle the elaborate meals required for royal entertaining. During family visits, it bustled with activity as skilled staff prepared everything from simple family breakfasts to formal dinner parties. As they approached the kitchen door, the aroma of baking filled the air, something sweet and warm that reminded Louis of Christmas morning and birthday celebrations. Despite his nervousness, the comforting smell made him feel slightly more hopeful about the conversation ahead. Cook was exactly where Mrs. Henderson had predicted, standing at one of the central preparation islands, working on what appeared to be an array of Easter treats for the following day's celebration. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, flour dusting her apron, and the efficient movements of someone who had spent decades perfecting her culinary craft. When she heard footsteps approaching, Cook looked up with a welcoming smile that faltered slightly when she saw Louis's tear-stained face and the serious expressions of his family members. Her experienced eyes immediately understood that something significant had occurred. Your Royal Highnesses, she said, wiping her hands on her apron and offering a respectful curtsy. How may I help you this afternoon? William gently guided Louis forward, positioning him where he could face Cook directly while remaining close enough for moral support. Louis has something he needs to tell you about the chocolate sculpture you created for tomorrow's celebration. Cook's expression shifted to one of concern as she looked down at the small prince, whose courage seemed to be wavering now that the moment of truth had arrived. She had been working with royal children long enough to recognize the signs of a serious confession about to unfold. Take your time, dear, Cook said kindly, her voice carrying the same maternal warmth that had comforted countless children over the years. Whatever it is, we'll sort it out together. Louis took a shaky breath, remembering Mrs. Henderson's advice about honesty being the most important virtue in difficult situations. When he spoke, his words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would somehow make the truth less painful. I broke your beautiful chocolate sculpture, he said, tears beginning to flow again. I climbed on a step stool because I wanted to taste just a tiny piece, and, when I touched it, the whole thing fell apart. All your hard work is ruined, and, it's completely my fault, and, I'm very, very sorry. Cook's face went through several expressions as she processed this information: surprise, disappointment, and, then, something that looked almost like understanding. She glanced briefly at William and Catherine before focusing her attention entirely on Louis. I see, she said thoughtfully. That must have been very frightening when it started to fall apart. Louis nodded vigorously, relieved that Cook seemed to understand how scared he had been. It happened so fast. 1 second I was just touching it very gently, and, the next second there were cracks everywhere, and, I couldn't make it stop breaking. Chocolate sculptures can be quite delicate, Cook agreed, surprising Louis with her matter-of-fact tone. Especially when they're as tall as the one I made. The balance has to be just perfect, and, sometimes even the smallest touch can upset that balance. Mrs. Henderson and I collected all the pieces, Louis continued, eager to show that he was taking responsibility for fixing what he could. Some of them are still really beautiful, especially the flowers you made. Charlotte thinks maybe we could use them to make something new for tomorrow. Cook's eyebrows rose with interest at this information. Charlotte had an idea about using the pieces. What did she suggest? Charlotte, who had been standing quietly behind her parents, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had been thinking hard about creative solutions. Instead of one big sculpture, maybe the pieces could become lots of smaller decorations. Like a chocolate garden spread across the table, with the flowers and pretty pieces arranged so everyone could see them better. And, maybe, George added, inspired by his sister's creativity, people could even take pieces home with them as special Easter memories. Cook's expression brightened considerably as she considered these suggestions. The disappointment that had briefly crossed her face was being replaced by something that looked distinctly like professional challenge and creative excitement. You know, she said slowly, I've been thinking that sculpture was perhaps a bit too grand for a family celebration anyway. Something more interactive, more personal, might actually be much nicer. She paused, studying Louis's worried face. Would you like to see something, Your Royal Highness? Without waiting for an answer, Cook led the family to a large refrigeration unit and opened its doors to reveal several shelves lined with additional chocolate creations. There were individual Easter eggs for each family member, chocolate rabbits in various poses, and an assortment of smaller sculptures that perfectly complemented the larger centerpiece. I always make backup pieces, Cook explained with a gentle smile. Royal celebrations require contingency plans, especially when there are children involved. Your sculpture wasn't the only chocolate preparation for tomorrow, it was just the most visible one. Louis stared at the additional chocolates with amazement and growing relief. You mean, tomorrow won't be ruined? Even though I broke the big sculpture. Oh, my dear boy, Cook laughed, the sound warm and reassuring. One broken sculpture, even a very grand one, could never ruin an Easter celebration. The magic of Easter isn't in any single decoration, it's in families being together, sharing special moments, and creating memories that last long after the chocolate has been eaten. Catherine felt tears welling in her own eyes as she watched the interaction between Cook and her youngest son. The kindness being shown to Louis in his moment of shame and fear was exactly the type of grace and compassion she hoped her children would both receive and learn to give throughout their lives. But, your hard work, Louis persisted, still grappling with the guilt of destroying something beautiful. You spent so much time making it perfect, and I ruined it. Cook knelt down to Louis's eye level, her movements gentle and deliberate. Your Royal Highness, may I share something with you? In all my years of cooking and creating special things for celebrations, I've learned that the most important ingredient in any recipe isn't flour or sugar or even the finest chocolate from Belgium. The most important ingredient is love, love for the people we're creating for, love for the process of making something special, and love that continues even when things don't turn out exactly as we planned. She gestured toward the refrigerated chocolates and, then, toward the kitchen around them. "I made that sculpture because I love creating beautiful things for your family's celebrations. The fact that it broke doesn't diminish that love or make the work meaningless. And, now, thanks to your sister's wonderful idea, we have an opportunity to create something even more special, something that involves everyone and creates new memories." Louis looked uncertain but hopeful. "Really? You're not angry with me?" "I'm not angry, dear one. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" Louis clearly couldn't understand how anyone could be grateful for having their artwork destroyed. "Grateful that you told the truth about what happened, grateful that you cared enough about my work to worry about whether it was perfect, and grateful that your accident has given us a chance to be creative in a new way." Cook stood up and brushed flour from her apron. "Now, would you like to help me plan how to turn those chocolate pieces into something wonderful for tomorrow?" The transformation in Louis's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The weight of guilt and fear that had been pressing down on his small shoulders seemed to lift all at once, replaced by excitement and the eager energy that was more typical of his personality. "I can help." "Really? Even though I broke it?" "Especially because you broke it," Cook replied with a grin. "Who better to help redesign it than the person who understands exactly which pieces we have to work with?" What followed was one of the most collaborative and joyful afternoon activities the Wales family had experienced during their Sandringham visit. Cook retrieved the collected chocolate pieces from the dining room, and the entire family gathered around the kitchen's central island to plan their new Easter centerpiece. Louis, initially hesitant to touch anything chocolate-related, gradually regained his confidence as Cook guided him through examining each piece and discussing how it might be used. The intricate flowers that had adorned the original sculpture were perfect as individual decorations. The royal emblems could be arranged in a pattern around the table. The larger pieces of the main egg could be broken down further into sharing-sized portions that guests could enjoy throughout the celebration. Charlotte's artistic eye proved invaluable as she suggested arrangements and color combinations. George contributed practical ideas about stability and structure that would prevent any future collapses. William and Catherine found themselves drawn into the creative process, offering suggestions and marveling at their children's ingenuity. But it was Louis who surprised everyone the most. As his initial shame and fear faded, he revealed a genuine aptitude for creative problem-solving and an artist's eye for beauty that no one had previously recognized. His suggestions for arranging the chocolate pieces were both practical and aesthetically pleasing, and his enthusiasm for the project became infectious. "What if we made paths between the chocolate flowers, like garden walkways?" he suggested at one point, carefully positioning smaller pieces to create flowing lines across the planned display. "And maybe we could use some of the round pieces as stepping stones." "That's brilliant, Louis!" Charlotte exclaimed, building on her brother's idea. "It could be like a miniature Sandringham garden, but made entirely of chocolate." Cook watched the children work with obvious delight, occasionally offering technical advice about structural stability or food safety, but mostly allowing their creativity to flow freely. She pulled additional supplies from her kitchen stores, edible flowers, gold leaf, and delicate sugar work that could enhance their collaborative design. As the afternoon progressed, their chocolate garden concept evolved into something far more elaborate and beautiful than the original sculpture had ever been. Instead of a single centerpiece that guests would admire from a distance, they were creating an interactive chocolate landscape that would invite exploration and participation. "You know," William observed as he watched his youngest son carefully position a chocolate rabbit among the edible flowers, "this is turning out to be much more special than what we originally planned." "Sometimes the best things come from the unexpected," Catherine agreed, photographing Louis's concentrated expression as he worked. "This will definitely be an Easter celebration we remember forever." As evening approached and their chocolate garden neared completion, Cook made an announcement that delighted everyone, especially Louis. "I think this creation deserves a special name," she said formally. "I propose we call it Prince Louis's Easter Garden, in honor of the young man whose curiosity led us to discover something wonderful." Louis's face glowed with pride and happiness that was entirely different from the guilt and shame he had felt just hours earlier. Instead of being remembered for breaking something beautiful, he would be remembered for helping to create something even more special. Really? He asked, hardly daring to believe that his name would be associated with something positive rather than destructive. Really, Cook confirmed. Every great artist sometimes breaks things while discovering their true talents. Today, you learned that accidents can become opportunities, and that's a lesson worth celebrating. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Louis couldn't stop talking about their chocolate garden project. His excitement was pure and infectious, and his siblings found themselves caught up in his enthusiasm for the next day's celebration. "Tomorrow's going to be the best Easter ever," Louis declared as Catherine tucked him into bed that night. "Even better than if I hadn't broken the sculpture, because now everyone gets to be part of making it special." Catherine kissed his forehead, marveling at her young son's resilience and capacity for learning from difficult experiences. "What do you think was the most important thing you learned today, darling?" Louis considered this question seriously before answering. "That telling the truth is always better than hiding mistakes, even when you're scared. And that sometimes when things seem really bad, they can turn into something really good if you ask for help and work together with people who love you." "Those are very wise lessons," Catherine agreed. "And I'm very proud of how you handled everything today, especially the scary parts." The next morning dawned bright and beautiful, perfect for Easter celebration. The family gathered in the dining room to admire their collaborative chocolate garden, which looked even more magnificent than they had remembered. Cook had added final touches overnight, delicate sugar butterflies that seemed to hover over the chocolate flowers, and tiny Easter eggs nestled throughout the edible landscape. When extended family members and guests arrived for the celebration, they were immediately enchanted by the unique centerpiece. Instead of admiring a single sculpture from a distance, everyone was invited to explore the chocolate garden, discovering hidden details and sharing pieces throughout the meal. Louis beamed with pride as he explained the garden's features to anyone who would listen, telling the story of how the original sculpture had broken and how the family had worked together to create something new and wonderful. His honesty about the accident and his enthusiasm for the collaborative solution charmed every guest. "You know, Louis," his grandfather said during the celebration, "some of the best innovations in history have come from people who weren't afraid to admit their mistakes and, then, work hard to make things better." As the Easter celebration continued into the afternoon, with egg hunts in the gardens and family games on the lawn, Louis reflected on his chocolate adventure. What had begun as a moment of selfish curiosity and ended in disaster had somehow transformed into one of his favorite family memories. The chocolate trouble at Sandringham had taught him lessons about honesty, responsibility, creativity, and the power of family love that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And every Easter thereafter, when the family returned to Sandringham, Cook would create a special chocolate garden in honor of the young prince who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the courage to turn accidents into opportunities. Years later, when Louis was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them the story of the great chocolate catastrophe and the magical Easter garden that grew from its ruins. And they would learn, as he had learned, that love, honesty, and creativity could transform even the most embarrassing mistakes into treasured family legends that brought joy for generations to come.